of course, has no comparison to the Mount St. Helens any more than Millbrook does to the state of Washington. But a year ago, if you will recall, we took our annual walk, and Ellen and Brian and Austin and Lee Fenner took some pictures of the places we went, and they have put together some slides recounting our little journey. And it was not the most pleasant of days. It rained off and on, sometimes a little and sometimes a lot, but we were very graciously invited to start our tour down to Thorndale and view the whole place down there, which Bill was so gracious to show us around and explain everything to us. And I think that those are the first ones on the reel, aren't they, Austin?
Yes.
Thorndale pictures.
Right. Yes.
So instead of me trying to tell, gratefully, Bill is here. He can tell us exactly what we saw. Would you mind doing that for us, Bill? We thank you.
You let me know when you want the next slide then, so we can...
Well, this is a granite plaque out on a brick wall in the side of the main house, around the circle in the front. And that apparently is a cornerstone that's been there for years and years. And that date is pretty factual, I guess, that you can see there. That shows from the side lawn of the big house looking over toward the yew garden and the brick wall, and then eventually behind that where the stable is. And that's another shot of the yew garden. And that's a little office that Mr. Thorne used years ago when he was running the estate and the farm. He used that as an office. That's a picture from the sideline.
That's a great shot.
That's a picture looking over the yew garden at the main house. It's a very similar picture. This is out in the circle looking over the front pond in front of the main house. And that's it's a picture of a tree, it's a spruce tree that now has blown over. It's laying on its side right now. There's another picture of that same tree. It doesn't look like that now.
How long ago did that happen?
It happened last fall.
Oh.
And that's a picture behind the pond looking over at the main house. It's looking over the pond from the circle. That's underneath that unusual looking tree.
And that's blown over now, you said
That's
that?
laying over on its side right now.
Oh dear, what a shame. How old do you think that tree is, or was?
Probably over 200 years old, maybe more. Just looking at the main house from the circle. Front end. That's looking down through. Years ago there used to be a vista that, as you look from this point, it was a focal point at the bathhouse in the distance, along the furthest distance. And years ago there was a maple hedge that completed this vista right on down to that bathhouse. And it was all squared and shaped, a very pretty vista, which through the years it had to be eliminated because of the high maintenance to take care of it. That's a picture of a stone house that Mrs. Parshall first lived in when she was first married. And Mr. Thorne built that for Mrs. Parshall in her first marriage.
Mrs. Parshall was Mr. Thorne's daughter?
Right.
That was, at the time that was built, she was married to Edward H. Carl. I remember when that.
Hey, Charles.
Then she later married Lawrence B. Smith, and they lived there too. This is one of your pictures, Austin. That's coming down from the tribute garden right in the village.
Yeah, that's looking down the hill of the tribute garden up the
Up Franklin Avenue.
Franklin Avenue.
And this is Mrs. Day's house. She's here tonight. There she is.
Hey, how would you like to explain that? You've got all the historical records on it, much better than some of the rest of us. It's a beautiful piece of property.
I didn't know a whole lot about it. I know that it was once a very large farm and it was built by Isaac Merritt and started in about 1825. And he had married the middle daughter of Philip Hart. And I think it was called Prospect Hill at the time. I have an old map that shows it. And this is just the front of the house.
For years it was Smiths and then Downings lived there.
And this is just the front door with the leaded glass windows. And that's the back. Now, you mentioned that day, Mrs. Day, about this closed-in porch that was originally open. Did you tell us that day?
As far as I know, in fact, Mrs. Martin, who had it before we did, told me that before she had it, it had been brick, that Mr. Bordini had closed in an open porch with brick, and then she put siding on it to hide the brick. I think it probably looked very much like the other porches that you see.
Right.
But the roof is the same. Oh, well, give or take.
Now we go next door, and that's the home that is now occupied by the Williams family. And that was originally that was built by another one of the Harts, or built by Mr. Hart for one of his daughters. Was it Charlie? Or?
I understood that. And somewhere there's a record that the piece of property that sits on was taken from the whole property of where Mrs. Day lives now. It came off that same property. It just took this chunk off and built that house on it. Harts. Edgar Downing and Pat lived in there for quite a long time. Of course, his family lived in the big house up on the hill, Mrs. Day's house. And they ran the orchards and everything, but that's where Edgar lived.
Then we cross the street, and this is where the Donato family live at the present time, but this was the original Hart home in Hart Village. This is the front, well, I don't know, they've got two fronts to the house. This is the one that faces the little lane. And the horse, or the carriage threshold, I guess, or mounting block, or whatever is there. Mrs. Donato mentioned that day, I remember that Mrs. Hart was either a Puritan or a Quaker. Do you remember that, Charlie? And see the paneling under the windows? I think that she said that the outside of the house had that paneling, but that the inside of the house was rather plain, because Mrs. Hart was either a Puritan or a Quaker. I don't remember which one she said. And I believe the inside of the house is plainer than the outside. They sort of combine their likes.
Yeah. Well, that's quite an old house. That was, for some of you people of more recent vintage, that was, Carrie Havlin lived there for years. That was named Carrie Havlin. She was related to the Harts, the descendant of the one that built it. I think it was Philip Hart, but I'm not sure about that. And the horse block out front that's still sitting there.
Now this is the other side of the house. I don't know what you really want to call the front. They're both lovely.
Well, there wasn't much difference between the front and the back, because they used to go around the house, and the driveways went all the way around, and they fixed both sides up pretty well.
The hallway went straight through.
The hall is the center hall. It goes all the way through, door on each end. And that's the one out by the road. That was also built by the Harts, and I remember the two lovely ladies, Frances and Emily White, lived in there when I was a kid. And different people have lived there. Colonel Woods lived there for a while, and the Nims has lived there. And I don't know who's in there right now. That's right out on the edge of the road. That's also a nice house.
That was built for another Harts daughter, Charlie?
Yeah, one of the Harts. That is the house which the Berets live in at the moment, and that was the Hart Mill. It's down close to the corner, and on the other side of it is where the mill pond used to be. That depression there where the two streets come together was where the pond used to be, and they fixed it all up and made a nice home out of it. That's old. And that is what used to be a fulling mill, they used to call it, where they finished the cloth. And that's where Willard and Ruth Owen live at the moment. They bought it. It wasn't a very big house. Carl Hazard fixed it all over very nicely years ago. And that's the corner of it.
I don't know, can you see what the date is that corner there, Austin?
1795.
795.
Is there a footbridge there somewhere?
Behind this.
Behind it. It goes from that left-hand corner, which is not visible now. Maybe, can you back up one, Austin? You're asking about the footbridge. The path to the footbridge in back of the Fran there, there's a little fence there now, but there used to be a gate went through there, and you went down in there and across the footbridge. It was on the left corner, just about where that tree is, and that left of Fran there. Okay, excuse me.
If I remember correctly, Willard said that there is no doorknobs in this house, that it's all the original hardware, and they're all wrought iron latched doorways or something.
I think they are.
No, I think he said no doorknobs.
Now there's the remains of the footbridge. That goes across from Willard's house would be on the left, and that goes across the stream and comes out almost in front of the yellow house that I think Carrie Havlin used to live in, the Donatos live in it now. But there's no flooring in it, no planks in the floor anymore, and it's just sitting there. So it's closed. Now that is the house that Helen and Elton Gould live in, close to the mill, just north of the mill, right alongside of Willard Owen's house. It is now a two-family house. Helen and Elton live in one side, and their brother Bert lives on the other side. It always was the home of the miller, the person who was in charge of the mill there years back. Nice piece of property. It sits up on a high bank there, and that gorge is right over behind it there on your left.
I remember that that day that Helen Gould said that when her dad bought that home, it had a front porch that went the full extent of the house, and she showed us a picture of it, and I guess they took it off.
Well, that's some stonework in back, and I think that is, it looks as if it were access to down to the flume there, so they can inspect things or work on the flume where the water goes from the pond into Dieter's mill. There's the dam. The water that goes into the mill come off on the left-hand or on the right-hand corner here and went to the mill. There's the mill looking from Elton Gould's front yard. Look, the water went in on this side, and the wheel was down underneath where the stone is there, and it discharged out on the lower side of that mill. That's real high out there. Another place is a mill.
We figure it's about 8 stories.
It's all of 8 stories.
Yeah.
We might even throw in another half.
Yeah.
That's a picture of the gorge down the back of the mill. Austin can explain that one. He took this picture, I believe.
Not that one.
Not that one?
No.
That's, I think this is not, yeah, I did, yeah, that, I was just trying to get a series of, from the top of the mill down to the water line, and it took me 3 pictures to do it.
That's fine.
So you can just see the depth of the height of that mill.
This is somebody, this must be Austin's, is it?
I think this one is mine.
There's really more of a gorge back there than you realize.
Well, the next one may show the gorge. That's mine. When
Yeah.
I walked up there quick in my stocking feet.
And there wasn't even a train there, Austin, and you still walked up in your stocking feet.
This is out on the street side.
That little fellow was my helper.
It's probably one of the Malalas.
I would imagine.
Little Malala boy, I guess.
Well, that is supposed to be the oldest house in the village. That is the one that Hayton Company moved their office into down there on North Ave, or on Front Street. Well, we kind of got through and had some film left, so that's what was in the Masonic Temple. Now with a touch of nostalgia, they bought it. This is Marcella, and the other building belongs to Reardon Briggs. That's been there quite a while. That was Mrs. Petrone had an Italian grocery there for years and years when we were growing up in Millbrook.
Charlie, the day of that, our walk, you said something about that, the lodge. When was that built? It was just resold within the last 4 years or so, wasn't it? Or?
Well, it was built by a group of men calling themselves the Millbrook Club. And they were just a social club. I've got a list of names up at the house. I didn't ever think about bringing them. But they bought the land from James Reardon and his wife in 1892. And then they proceeded to build that building for a clubhouse. And they sold it to the Masons in 1917. And they sold it, what, in 1980? At the beginning of 1981, it was in January of 1981. And that, of course, is St. Joseph. You can see how nicely it was raining, see how the pavement is wet. We got there.
Monsignor McGuire took us in and showed us around the church, and the church was 100 years old in 1971 or 1972. He gave us quite a history of it, and it was interesting. Where the rectory is now, there used to be a blacksmith shop, he was telling us.
Yeah. We had a picture of that blacksmith shop when we did the old businesses in Millbrook. That was Jimmy Ricks' grandfather had that blacksmith shop, and it's at almost exactly where the rectory is. This is up in Cardinal Hayes.
Well, that was the Chancellor House. Do I know
Yes, that was Mr. Thorne's other daughter, Charlotte Thorne, married to Dr. Philip Chancellor, and that was their home. And then they subsequently moved to California, and then it became, through the Thorne family, became Cardinal Hayes.
And that's it.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.